In this video, we're going to go behind the scenes on the visual effects breakdown for Mortal Kombat. This is part 3 in the 5-part series. We're exploring creature effects such as Goro, Reptile, and Jax. Throughout this video, we're going to dig deep into deconstructing the visual effects process for the film from the unique perspective of a visual effects supervisor. We'll be discussing the work involved, the techniques, the technology, the process, all of the sequences of the film, and how they were created. I'm Allan McKay, I'm a visual effects supervisor in Hollywood. I've been working in the industry for over 25 years at studios like Industrial Light and Magic and dozens of other leading visual effects studios. On projects like Game of Thrones, Transformers, Star Trek, Superman, Avengers Endgame, my goal is to teach artists and creators the skills and the knowledge to be able to build a successful career in the creative industry, as well as the business side of being an artist. This is a 5-part video series. Each day this week I'll be reviewing a new sequence from the film, as well as a compilation of all the effects at the end of the week. The goal is simply to break down and explain the shots and the challenges for each of these sequences, and share my thoughts as a visual effects supervisor on how I would approach these. Typically, we're handed a script and we've got to break down exactly what we need to do and allocate the right studios and the right people to each of these sequences. So this is an opportunity to be able to break down my thoughts on how I would approach a lot of these sequences, as well as discuss a lot of what's involved in the creative process. By the way, if you're enjoying this channel, all the content I make in this channel I make for free, and all I ask in return is if you could please subscribe and like this video. It might not mean much to you, but it'll mean the world to me, and you won't miss out on any of the upcoming content that I release daily. Finally, if there's a particular movie that you want to see covered in the upcoming visual effects breakdowns, let me know. Leave a comment below, I'd love to hear from you. As well as any questions that maybe I haven't covered yet, I'm happy to answer all of those as well. So, let's get started. Okay, so let's dig into everything related to creatures. This is going to be fun to talk a bit about creature effects. I think this video is going to be a bit different to the other lessons just because we're focusing more on some of the creature stuff, which for the most part is relatively the same all the way through. But let's just dig into all this. So this is Goro, which if you remember the 1995 version, which I think I've only ever seen once, but the way that that was approached was stop motion. For the movie, and it's funny because that's exactly how they approached it for the video game as well, and it definitely looked kind of odd, but that's 1995. Like Jurassic Park had only come out 2 years before that, so obviously there's been a lot of innovation since then, as well as the budget I'm sure wasn't that big for that film, whereas with this I feel like they actually had acquired a pretty comfortable budget, just because they flashed the whole "we'll make a Mortal Kombat universe" kind of card out of it all. So let's just dig into some of this stuff. This is CG. Just to talk a bit about this stuff, I feel like a lot of these shots, they've actually opted for doing a lot of CG recreation of the environments. So let's talk about some of the challenges here. One of the first things that you're going to come across is actually the fact that this dude is like, I think 8 feet tall, something like that, Prince Goro. And whereas this guy here, I'm assuming if you're being really forgiving, he's 6 feet. I think he's probably maybe a little bit shorter than that. So the challenge is going to be eyeline, because whoever you're dealing with, they're going to be a dude looking cool. They're not going to be that tall. It's more going to be over this way. So I have seen some of the blue screen footage that they shot on, and obviously, you know, your hands cut off around here, so they've got like these extenders, kind of like wetter feet if you've ever seen them. Just something to essentially replicate where his fists are going to be, so that way when you're blocking, you're actually blocking accurately. Otherwise, you'll be like, why is Cole kind of fighting this center here and nowhere else? And it's because obviously that's who he's interacting with. So it's really important that the person he interacts with at least fits the proportions of this guy. And that means that you're going to have like a face kind of on top of your head. And that way you've got something that he can interact with. He can look at him and say, that's where Goro's head's going to be. The other tricky thing is the fact that I'm going to do a cool stick figure here, has 4 arms. So that's my cool Goro stick figure here. And I've always thought that animating this stuff, I've never done a 4-armed character, but I've always thought tentacles, as well as anytime you're animating a character with 4 arms, it's got to be pretty tricky because you've got to put intent behind all of it. There's got to be a lot going on, both with what you're doing in terms of having a bipedal character that also has 2 arms and getting them to punch and grab and react, but then they've got another set of arms, and what are they doing? So that I've always figured is going to be quite difficult to pull off. And it's interesting to see some of the ways that the animation is done. When you start to think about, like, well, how's he typically animating? It's cool there to do that because it's just a very quick introduction of, like, wait a minute, there's a lot more hands than there should be, you know. And it's having Goro come out, obviously he's towering over everything. And then something like this, you've got him grabbing him and picking him up, but what do you do with the other arm? I feel like there's like an awkwardness to it of like, well, what do my other arms do while I'm doing this? So it's just something I always think about when animating this stuff because it obviously is going to be trickier. So just to get some of the challenges out of the way, what you're dealing with here is going to be a character that you got to do your initial animation, so you're doing performance capture. In other words, you got the blue screen dude here doing his thing, and you're not necessarily match moving that specifically to capture that amazing performance. It's purely for this person to have something to play off of. If he's just throwing his hands in the air trying to interact with nothing, then it comes across as nothing. But when you have someone to play off of, you're going to get the right performance. But it means that you've got complete creative freedom when it comes to how you want to animate Goro. And that's the advantage here, is the fact that there is a performer doing something, but it's purely for him to play off of. That means that you have complete creative freedom in terms of the performance you want to get. And a lot of that's kind of roughed out in previs. But what I imagine a lot of the time is that they're doing the previs to block out all the animation, then they capture the performance, then they go back, and then they're going to do post-viz, where they're going to be deciding, okay, what do we really want to have happen here? What do we want in terms of the nuances, all the stuff? Because you got the basic blocking working, but now it's about, like, what kind of performance do we want to get? And it kind of revises more and more from there. So if you think about the process, you're going to start out with SB for storyboarding, and then it's going to pipe through to previs, and then you're going to go and do the principal photography, and then you're going to go into post-viz, and then you're going to go into first pass anim, just to start blocking out the actual animation here, and then you're going to go into final anim. However, once that's all done, what you're going to end up with is a bald, very basic, let's just say a very basic skeleton of Goro. Can't help myself. So once you have that, though, you're gonna now need to go and do the muscle sims on top of that. So that means that you're going through and you have very basic shapes that represent the muscles that squash and stretch and do their thing. And this is looking really weird really quick, but you get the idea. Like, what you're essentially doing is you're blocking out all of the muscle groups and everything to go on the character. And once you've done that, you've actually got the character model, and the muscles are underneath that really kind of move and flex the character itself. So you'll have the character model doing its thing, but then what you'll be doing on top of that is you're going to be doing the hair sim here. Well, actually, before we even get into that, you have a cloth sim. And usually this sort of stuff you'll break up even more. So you've got the kind of his pants, I don't know what you want to call it, his skirt here. Let me just get rid of this stuff. In fact, sorry, I'm going to keep that around, just get rid of this stuff really quick. So just to talk about this a bit more cleanly, you're going to have all of this stuff here is a cloth sim. and all the stuff up here is a cloth sim. Okay, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to do it all in one sim. Potentially, you might sim the back areas because they're more leather in the belt, or the belt can actually be geometry. But then you might have this flapping area of cloth, loincloth, whatever you want to call it, at the front. And that could potentially be a second sim. And it's just because that way you're able to do the rigid sim, kind of get that working how you want, and then you have the lighter cloth reacting to all that rather than having it all in one sim. And it's just a process. So you can do like first pass, second pass, baking it all out as you go. And it's the same thing here, that this, I believe, can potentially be cloth, like a leather sim, so that way as it moves around it actually deforms rather than relying specifically on rigging for all of that. Then you've got all the fur that's on here. And potentially, you know, there might be some stuff down here too, but let's just focus on that. That's going to be a hair sim, and so is his little ponytail as well. So there's a lot of simulation going into the character alone, and then you're doing the dust and other effects simulations, all this stuff on top. And it's all phasic, so it means that you're going through one to the next, and you're continuing to kind of evolve through all this stuff. So that's the general workflow that you're typically looking at these days for a character to be animated. And then you're doing your facial animation as well. I'm assuming that this is all keyframed for two reasons. One is that, you know, he's not really doing major performance. I think he has like 1 or 2 shots of dialogue. Where performance capture really comes in is just the subtleties. It just looks so much better. But in this case, just, you know, not to say it in a not nice way, but like the facial animation is a bit more rudimentary. It's not as subtle and just a lot of the subtle nuances that you get with performance capture. And that's not to say bad animation. The animation's great. It's just more to do with the fact that like performance capture is just believable. It's phenomenal. Like I've got an interview with Doug Roble, who did a TED Talk on this stuff. He's been around with Benjamin Button, all the Thanos performance capture. He's heading up all the digital human stuff over at Digital Domain. So I mean, just chatting with him about the stuff is just really inspiring to kind of see where all this stuff is going. And that's where he's saying to me within the next 5 years, because we did a panel with Google and NVIDIA, and we were talking about artificial intelligence. And I had to break down what AI is for the layman, which was it's really tricky to try and explain everything about deep learning and machine learning and neural networks, all this stuff, how it all works within 10 minutes, and give a whole presentation on that stuff. But it was fun to talk with NVIDIA, Google, and Doug about all the stuff they're doing. And he was saying that in the next 5 years, animators are not going to be animating the way that we animate right now. You know, you would pull out your phone and just capture animation, and it would be suddenly in the viewport, and you would have the exact animation you want to work with. It's so amazing. So I don't know how much of this stuff is actually captured in frame, because when you think about it, like there is only like this one kind of set location. Then they keep cutting back to the daughter and wife reacting, you know, helplessly, which I don't blame him. I'd probably be in the same boat. So there's really just this one kind of virtual set location and then inside. And I don't know how much of this is virtual and what isn't. This all looks really great. And I would have just assumed that it's all filmed, but knowing, like I had seen some of the footage and was all blue screen, also knowing that they're interacting with a virtual character that's actually quite big, there's going to be a lot of wire work just throwing him around. There's also digital double work. So knowing that also inside of here, a lot of this environment gets destroyed very quickly, and having it collapse down, I just kind of wonder how much of this is actually just created as a virtual environment. And that's usually an area I wouldn't just jump to. Like I'm always going to assume that you're going to shoot everything in frame, but I am curious about this. So let's just walk through the stuff really quick. You have shots like this where, again, you would previs everything out so you know exactly what you're going to be capturing, but it's essentially going to be with the stunt coordinator and the DP and the director just really kind of going over the stuff, just saying like, okay, this is the shots we want, this is what we're going for. But as we get in here, there's a lot of quick cuts, but as we get to this shot here, I kind of feel like this was a virtual human, just knowing that there's a couple of things with the salty of the animation. Because again, like, this stuff looks great. It's not like you're going to look at this and be like, oh, well, this is obviously CG. And that's the tricky thing with a lot of more recent films, is that unless they've done a bad job, a lot of the time it's going to look real. But it's more about making the right decisions. And just looking at, first of all, how he's thrown. Like, here's the challenge. You got this four-armed dude, punches him, and you got to feel like he's punched back. Usually, if you're doing a shot like this, you're going to put him onto a pulley rig with a harness, and you're going to have two people yank him back really quickly. Whereas, like, he feels more like he actually is being punched back, not pulled back. And on top of that, the way that he's landing, you would usually have someone land on cushion, so you get some stuff to react, but like, just the way that that lands, it just feels like, no, like he really trashes everything in that environment. Like, I just feel like that's a digital double shot right there. And the more that suddenly this whole thing is just collapsing down, it's just like, well, it makes sense just to go all digital for these shots, because the entire environment's collapsing. You're in this very tight area, which is very painful to shoot in. And obviously, if you're on a soundstage, then you can just pull back a wall and get all the room you want, but just knowing how quickly this environment kind of gets destroyed and the type of shots they're doing, you could just go for a digital environment and shoot all the stuff in camera of him reacting, mostly on wires, and just try and get the performance you want. And then, like, for certain shots where you need that interaction, especially given the height and how strong this guy is, like, it's going to look very obvious if you got, you know, if you have him dangling, or if you have people kind of holding him up, or any of those situations. So going for a virtual human in a lot of these shots actually is the way to go. And then you have stuff like this. Now, to do something like this, it's easier just to do it all digitally, and it's easier to actually just get the area and destroy it all. Just run rigid bodies, break it all down. So you'd get like areas like this, let's say, and you do a wood sim, so you actually break it up into individual planks, and then what you're doing is you're gluing them back together. So you have a relationship set up where they have a set of control points that say, we're all tied together as one object. But if the velocity or friction or certain things happen, then this area might break the relationship, and you'll have like an individual plank then kind of like break off here. Okay, because you got hit too hard. So that's how you can get things to start to break apart and lose that relationship. Now, what you can then do is do a fracture sim as well, saying, well, if you get hit really hard, let's fracture this. And typically you do like a Voronoi sim, which is like weird kind of cut shapes. And it's good for rubble, but it doesn't look very good for this sort of stuff. However, you can set it up where you're changing the coordinates a little bit. You're trying to do more sharper cuts through changing the samples. So that way you're getting more this sort of splintering effect where it can break up a lot more. And that way you might get like more kind of slices and things like that. And that way when this breaks, the pieces are going to look more like broken, splintered wood rather than being like rocks or something inside of it. Okay, so instead you get these vertical splinters happening, and then those can break again depending on the size and everything. So usually what you would do is you would break the stuff off, but then you would have all these secondary, and these are just particles, little splinters of wood. And that also just kind of helps give it set different scales that you can work within. And then you do a dust sim on top of all that, which you can see is all here, and that just ties it all together. So that way there's essentially different scales. There's big chunks, really big unbroken chunks, and then you have splinters, and then you have the dust. And the dust is essentially representing like really small bits that are breaking, things like that. Usually also just like disturbing the ground and things like that too, because you can have like dust all lingering on the ground being kicked up. You have stuff up in the air, things like that. And so all of it kind of comes together very quickly. Things like having the lighting, which again, like digital lighting here, illuminating all the dust, that helps tie it into the environment. again, I usually wouldn't just jump to this conclusion, but I honestly think that a lot of the shots here are just completely digital, and they're reacting to pretty much nothing. And it's cool that we're kind of at that point. Now, as I scrubbed through before, I did notice one thing, which is pretty common to have this sort of thing. This could be a glitch, where one of the dust passes had a bunch of failed frames or something, but you see there's all this lingering dust, and then in one frame, it's just like, boonk. So usually you would make those calls of like, hey, I can't really see Goro, but I like the dust lingering up until that point, fade it out, so that way this area is kind of feathered out, and that way you can see what he's doing, because you want to get that performance while you still want to have all this stuff, because it really kind of makes a shot. But it kind of pops off in one frame. So I'm kind of wondering if there's like a bunch of dust, and perhaps like the shot got extended, and some of these shots, some of these elements were older and they just didn't get updated. Like you don't know what the heck went on, but a lot of the time you might get a failed frame, and because there's, or let's say the cache that simmed that one dust element crashed and didn't actually complete its sim, but because you've got like, let's say dust here, you know, dust lingering here and then on the ground, and then you have like this one area which this dust is actually coming from this piece of geometry, so there's this big trail of dust. Perhaps the cache actually broke, and because you can see all the other dust in the past, and because they're rendering from 0 to like 200 frames correctly or something, you just don't notice that there's like this one missing piece, and somehow it slipped through. Because when you're playing it, there's so much going on that you're not really focusing on the fact that there's one, actually it's really noticeable now that you're looking at it, but there's stuff like that where it just kind of pops off, and it's just like, you know, that made it to print, like that made it into the movie. So those issues happen, you know. As I look through all this though, like that's basically what you'd be doing is you could just break, you know, the shed, or whatever you want to call it, the garage, whatever it is. You just do a rigid body and collapse it all down. What I would actually do, because you notice how it's all stacked, the way that's stacked. Yeah, you could run a sim, and that way it just all naturally falls apart. Or you could get like the wall, run a sim where it all just drops on the ground and breaks, and then you get another wall and you drop that on the ground and it breaks, then you get the ceiling, you drop that on the ground. So you're naturally just stacking this stuff up. It's kind of like dropping a watermelon from the top of a building. You just see it explode, but you're doing this to individual pieces to kind of stack it all up naturally. We did this for a pitch. This is $1 million project that I was trying to land for Warhammer, God, a long time ago now, 2007, I think, 2006. And what we wanted to do is we knew in the Warhammer world you'd have like just these massive war fields that were all dead bodies that were all just stacked on top of each other, showing the kind of long history of death and battling and war and everything in Warhammer. So we're actually doing we wrote a script which would have, I'm just going to do a crude little 2-arm stick figure, but you would run a ragdoll sim, so the guy would fall and land on the ground, and then we'd do another one, and we're doing this like for thousands, and we was just baking all this stuff out. And it was really fun to do this because we're just stacking up loads and loads of bodies, just filling up the ground. Because originally the way that the art director for THQ was the client, they were pitching it was like they were just basically using texture maps just to kind of make it feel like there's bodies underneath, you know, some main body geometry. But we're physically doing sims of human bodies and orcs all piling up on top of each other. So that sort of stuff is really cool. Now, like that's kind of like how I would approach a lot of this stuff, and then you get it all stacked up, and then you have the animation of Goro smashing through. And the way that you do all of these sims is that they're one directional rather than bidirectional. Bidirectional would be if you had a sphere and another sphere, and they crash into each other. Usually one's going to repel, so that way it's going to bounce back that way, that's going to bounce back that way. Obviously not upward, but you get what I mean. And the thing is, if the mass of one is higher than the other, then what's actually going to happen is this guy might bash into this one and knock it out of the way. But either way, there is some reaction. It's going to lose some of its kinetic energy. Now, with a single directional stuff, you're essentially making an object unyielding, meaning that you could have a sphere, another sphere. This guy does not react. He's just going to do what he does, and this one's going to be the one that's dynamic, right? So this is going to move along, this is going to hit, and this never changes, never flinches. It would just knock this guy out of the way. And that's kind of how we do a lot of this stuff. It's like, you would get Goro, his forearms again, and yeah, you would get Goro, and you would animate him, and then you would make it an unyielding object. In other words, it's not dynamic, it's just getting the animation cache, and he can throw his arms in the air and throw all the wood and everything out of the way. Because that's what happens here, is that he ends up like kind of throwing, like leaping up a little bit and throwing all this stuff out of the way. Now, that's one way to do it. And the other way is to just to have like a sphere or something and have it like just shoot up in the air and maybe scale up a little bit. And that's just going to push everything out of the way. Because it doesn't matter about its performance. You're just trying to get all this stuff to react. So a lot of the times you might actually be basing it on the animation. You might be basing it on just having an object just push upwards, and it lifts everything above it up out of the way, and you get that reaction. But one thing I thought I'd just mention is, in terms of like one directional or bidirectional, that's also how we think of the pipeline, that you get animation, it's going to go over to cloth and blah, blah, blah. It's going to do all that stuff. Meanwhile, effects is going to get it, and they're going to do the destruction, and you're going to do dust and all that other stuff. Now, this feels like it's going to be one directional. It's a machine, a conveyor belt, where you maybe won't be able to see that on screen, but you're like modeling here and all these other bits, like it goes through all the phases. The thing is that a good effects person is going to understand that this is a bi-directional pipeline. In other words, there are going to be times where, let's say if you were basing on Goro's performance, and Goro lifts his arms up, and you get, to throw everything away, and then you get the sim and you run it, and you're like, hey, you know what? Like, it's looking really good because it is reacting to him and his performance, but it's too weak. We need to make it really exaggerated, really snappy to get that performance. That's when you need to go back to animation, and you don't just walk over to someone's desk and say, hey, do this, because everyone needs to be aware of everyone's schedule and resources. But in dailies or in a production meeting, you bring up like, hey, here's how it currently looks. We're not getting the performance we want. Can we kick this back to animation, get a revision? So that way, in the beginning, he's way more snappy. So that way we can get a more snappy animation from it. And that way animation comes back with version 2. It comes over to you, you put it in, you're like, yeah, this is a lot better. Or, okay, quick few more tweaks and then we should be done. And that way you're getting the animation to turn it how it should. It's the same thing with modeling. If you're destroying all this wood splinter stuff and the geometry is kind of like made really weirdly, or it's like really tessellated and over the top, you might tell them to go back and make some revisions to keep the topology clean. So having a bidirectional workflow means that everything is going to work how it should, rather than the problem being that the effects artist gets the wrong kind of animation and then they're forced to make it work and it just doesn't work. Or they're given models that just don't work, and then their job is way more complex because they haven't actually got good geometry to work with, and you're essentially shooting yourself in the foot. Something like this, though, I probably wouldn't use the animation. I would just get a sphere and shoot it up in the air, and this is all the debris, and it just shoots outwards, and you make it work. So also don't feel like you need to use the animation you got here. You can fake things as much as you want. But that's basically how you would do all this stuff. And then the thing about that is, like, if you're not set dressing all this, then it means that all this would be digital. So it's going to make sense. Like, okay, if it's all digital, something like this dude's just in a harness, kind of like holding him up. So with this, they're just sitting in a car without a ceiling or glass, as far as I can tell. And because this whole ceiling needs to be digital, so that way it breaks, it rips in all those areas. And then all the glass is also going to fracture. And it's a lot easier to put the glass on over them rather than shoot it with them behind the glass and then have to try and, like, deal with all this crap. So it's just easier to add digital glass in there. And then all the glass actually breaks when he smashes it there. So you see all the glass actually breaking and everything. Now, there's shots like this that I think are pretty comical, because when you think about the logistics of it, it isn't too bad. You can see it in the next shot, but like, you get the two people in the car, then you got Goro. He's tall, okay? So to get him to bend down, like I said, you can see the next shot is not too bad, but like, there are so many times where you're working on a shot, it looks correct in frame, but to get that shot, you're gonna have to have someone like really warped in terms of like how they're standing, just so that way you can, get the performance you want from it. So it is comical sometimes seeing like as soon as you move the camera away, like the whole illusion's broken. It just looks really silly. So yeah, just something to kind of keep in mind there. But you can see there, it's not too bad. He's pretty bent down, but to get even further, to be at the bottom of the window there, he's obviously going to bend down quite a lot. So another thing I thought I'd mention is that you'll notice something really interesting here, which is that all of the fire coming up here is actually the exact same style as all the flames that you'll see at the beginning of the movie with Scorpion, and then at the end of the movie with Scorpion. In other words, it's the same style, it's in the same family of effects as the Scorpion stuff, and that's because it's meant to tie into that. It's meant to represent that he's a distant relative of Scorpion and a few generations further down. And so you keep him with the continuity of that style, even though it's a very different effect. The flames actually tie into it, so they're part of the same family. So I kind of like that, even though they're different effects, different people, there are certain ones that are borrowed from the same family and the same style, and that's kind of more an homage to the other ones. It kind of links it all together. Now, in terms of doing this stuff, it's kind of funny because you don't really think about the suit, and personally I don't really like the design. I'm just like, alright, cool, you have a Black Panther kind of kinetic suit. Great. I feel like in a lot of these shots, like this is all digital, because just knowing how intricate it is, it's a lot easier just to say, oh, we'll just do it in 3D to keep all the patterns and everything. But he actually is wearing a rubber suit. Like there's certain shots you'll see, maybe not in the sequence, but there are certain shots where you can actually see the rubber suit kind of crinkling, and bending and warping a little bit weird. The thing is that this suit, as much as it's like, oh, okay, yeah, you got a cool suit, whatever. This, I have a sneaking suspicion this is probably one of the most tricky shots to pull off in the whole film. And more from just an annoying perspective of trying to get all this stuff right. Because you also got to think about like how the process goes, where you initially got the PD, the production designer. They're working with usually wardrobe or the prop master to develop the, I'm just going to call it the shirt. So once they've made this, you've then got to go in and then think about, well, how is this actually going to reveal on here? And this is something where there's going to be a very specific style to how this happens. Usually what's going to happen is once you've actually shot everything, some of these things like these props, you might actually, I was going to say mail out to the VFX department, but yeah, you might actually ship out some of the stuff to the studio, so that way they actually have the physical wardrobe outfit that they can then model everything off of and reference all the time. So that's common, like that happens all the time. So you might actually have that and you can actually look at it and really kind of get acquainted with the style of it all and everything. I was working on Daybreakers a long time ago. It was a vampire film, Willem Dafoe and Ethan Hawke. And at the beginning of the film, there's this little girl that Weta Workshop did. And actually my buddy was the supervisor at Weta Workshop, Steve Boyle. And yeah, it's like this little girl that like gets burnt alive. And they actually sent me the life-size sculpture of her all burnt alive, and it had been sitting on my desk for months while I'm working on that. I'm like staring at this burnt version of her. And the girl, I think, was 9 years old, and they actually filmed the movie in the city that I was in. So the little girl actually came in with her family, and we showed her the movie and like her burning alive and everything, the directors gave us permission to show it all. So I was actually showing her the life-size version of herself. Like, this is what you look like as a burnt-up vampire. It's kind of scary. So I'm gonna bust through this really quick. I actually wanted to sit down and go through this quite heavily, but unfortunately the cleaners just arrived. It's about to get really loud in here. So the way that this all happens is that if you imagine there's paths that this stuff follows, and that's what it's doing. So with these paths, then there's a set amount of these kind of lines. I'm trying to think of the right word for it, but all this mesh that follows along that path. And that's what you're doing is you have the surface geometry. I'm sure it has some kind of repel system set up, but it's all being driven by a lead particle, or, you know, under the surface, that's how you would look at it. Like, however technically they did it, maybe it's like, well, I didn't use particles, I use vectors, and same thing, right? But you have this leading one here, which is essentially the path, and these are all following that. And they have two kind of set states that they're kind of in. One is that it initially will wrap around. So let me do this again. It initially will wrap around like that. And then what happens is this suddenly locks down onto the surface. Let's just pretend this is the surface. And everything else seems to follow and lock down subsequently after that. So in other words, everything kind of loosely just flows around the geometry, and then it all comes and sticks to it. But it does it in sequence based on, let's say with particles, it would be based on particle life. So in other words, the leading particle is going to be younger, so it's going to come down first. Then, like, what that's doing is that as it's moving along the path, it's leaving a trail, which is all what gets meshed to create that spline. Again, however it's done, it's the same methodology. So like, as I refer to it this way, it can be done other ways, but it's exactly the same kind of thing under the hood. And so then, if this is lifespan of 10, this would be 9, 8, 7, all the way through. So that way these would subsequently all tighten down, but they all kind of lock into place. But to get that to intelligently do all these things and do it in a way that's a performance, that's where it gets tricky. And that's where you get certain shots like this, where when I was doing the VFX breakdown on Iron Man, I was pointing out there's certain shots that were one-offs. In other words, you might see all this geometry under his armor that's all modeled. There's so much detail, and that's literally a throwaway shot. That's one shot where all the modeling was done, all the animation was done just for that one shot, and then it's never used again. Like, it's not part of every shot. It's not like if you took off the external armor, then you would see all that stuff. It's just there for those shots to kind of give that indication of all the stuff going on. That's where I feel like some of these are throwaways, where perhaps you have this setup that kind of like flows around the arm, and they kind of use that setup quite a lot. But then there's certain ones like the breastplate here that these might be very specifically done just for this one particular shot. In the same family, just like the wrist flame at the beginning is part of like the Scorpion family of effects. I'm not talking about a family tree here, but these are specific just for this one shot, because I feel like this shot in particular is quite complex compared to some of the other ones that definitely have their challenges, but it's not going to be as tricky as this one shot. And that's why I feel like this sequence is actually probably a lot more of a headache than a lot of the other sequences in the movie, just because it's got to be very particular about a lot of stuff. Then you got stuff like this, where he's running out, that's all actor, then digi-double, so he gets flung away, then actor again, and I'd say that's where he is on a pulley, and he's being yanked along. Like I said, I think for some of this stuff, it's just easier to do a match move of a digital version of this, rather than trying to get it all to work together. Just knowing, like, how this stuff is glowy, because you could roto it, you could do you could have some special paints and replace it. I definitely would consider that. Like, let's just use some special paint, and then just kind of mask the areas you want to activate. But yeah, who knows? Oh, and my gardeners are here too now, so this is going to get really interesting. So I might have to wrap this up pretty quickly. before it gets too loud, apologies for all the background noises about to happen. You can see all the hair, cloth sims, all the detail. It's really great. So again, you can see all the cloth sims, you can see all the bits and pieces, the really nice backlighting. This is one thing I will mention is the approach for doing this stuff. So if you look, same family of stuff, but the way that this works is it's got an extra layer to it. So it's all following the same sort of reveal. And you'll notice in the next scene that this stuff ties into how Reptile was actually made as well. But what ends up happening is you have the initial base, which kind of creates the general surface, but then you have this next layer, which kind of solidifies and creates the whole weapon. So you'll see it here. It's very specific. You're seeing all these paths all wrapping around very quickly, and then they go through this phase of like going out and then tightening around to conform onto the surface. And the way you would do something like this is you would literally have a 3D model of the tonfa or the weapon, whatever it is, and it would use the geometry to initially flow over all of this. And then what would happen is it would actually conform to it. Okay, so this is all sticking, like snapping to it essentially. And so then you would have all of this stuff wrapped around. And this is actually going in 2 phases. So you have the initial stuff, and then you have this second layer, which is just filling it out. And then it actually kind of meshes into a solid thing, which is either a reveal, a wipe. You either just wipe it on like that, or it's just filled out enough that you can kind of just call it a day. And these ones are all props, so he's actually in those shots holding it. And this is one thing I love is like the blood is really well done here. I'm really picky about blood and liquids in general. Usually you end up with these like really clean blobby stuff everywhere. It's a lot of the little spritz that you don't even see that fill out the negative space. It's really good, as well as the mist. Mist really kind of represents high pressure, like something that kind of explodes blood and mist and things like that. So something like this, it just means that like it's more explosive when it happens, rather than being just this clean kind of like stream of blood. It kind of makes it feel like this thing's kind of exploding out blood everywhere. It's very high pressure because it just got cut open. So I think this stuff's really well done. I think they did a really good job. There's a few areas where I feel like they could have done wet maps. I feel like there's a shot at the very end where when he gets it in the eyeball. I think here, this is all wet maps. So you can see it actually trickling down here, whereas usually to get that exact trickling on everything would be quite tricky unless you have the fluid sim and it's painting the other particle, like the other blood kind of formations from there. But this is really well done. I like all this. I like all the decal painted blood splatters everywhere, just to kind of show progression that, you know, he continues to get more injured. I've talked about this before, but there's lots of different ways to do this. You could try to do it on the physical character as like some kind of like real-time cloth tearing, kind of ripping deal, where there's cloth, or there's hundreds of different terminologies or approaches you could do. Or you could actually go and basically do like a wrap deformer and kind of have this all, like the wound open up, and you're repathing that animation onto the character, which is what I would do, rather than trying to make it all physically correct and it being way more complicated than it needs to be. So I thought they did a really good job. It's all the blood and everything else. I love that he gets it so bad. It's like throat slash and then in the eye. Here, the main thing would be just to get the actor to keep their hand very still. I talked about Walking Dead because I had a lot of friends working on that. Been invited out to the set a few times. Still haven't gone, and I'm running out of time since they're into the final season. But that was always one of their big complaints, was that the actors would move their hands around too much. And they're meant to have a knife stuck in the zombie, so like if they're moving their hand around, it's going to be moving through the zombie. So they got to then try and stabilize and keep the hand a lot more locked. So like I said, all the blood trickling down from his back, I thought that was a really nice touch. Then this is just a fluid sim, and then again, plenty of different ways to do it, but you could literally do a rope sim, just like Scorpion with his chain, and just have his hands as an unyielding object, having it all contained and kind of drooping through. But you could also do it as a soft body. There's so many different ways to do that. But really nice touch. I love it. And then you have all the dust and everything, which helps just tie together that he's a heavy body hitting the ground. And this is where, because the camera's coming all the way down, you can actually set dress this with a lot of blood in the dirt, rather than trying to do that entirely in CG. And I feel like you're going to get a much better result than if you were just to do a clean pass on the ground. Whether they did that, it's hard to tell. But you always get such a really great performance from doing it that way. Really awesome. So I'm just going to plow through this really quickly before it gets too loud in here. But so you notice with Reptile, the way that this works too is you've got like areas like this where whatever he's hit, like that area kind of reveals. And if you look up close, it's exactly the same style as Cole's suit. In other words, you got all this stuff kind of initially revealing, it's kind of wrapping around the surface, and then that starts to wipe over to reveal more of a refracted version of him. And doing this sort of thing is relatively straightforward in terms of like, you just get beautiful detail right away, because as long as he has displacement and a lot of detail on him, the refraction is going to pick up a lot of highlights. The lighting that they have here really works for it as well. So this sort of thing works really well. You'll notice initially it starts out kind of more of that wire stuff that's all wrapped around just like Cole's suit, and then it kind of fills out very much like that tonfa baton, how it solidifies. So you can see here now there's a lot more surface detail as it's being revealed. The hand actually just kind of wipes on like a gradient. It's a little bit different, but I'd say that's just because there's not enough timing to do the reveal that they're doing earlier on. So I apologize for all the background noise. So you'll notice with this that you got all this illumination that, you know, obviously isn't there, but it helps kind of give a visual indicator as to like what's happening. So as there's a bullet impact, that area lights up. And without seeing that, it'd be very difficult to see this on the background. So it's a nice little touch where things kind of splash on. You can see here, there's a bullet, nice lens flare. I think you can see in this shot, or one of the upcoming shots, yeah, you can see all the kind of wire work. So like the wires is in like the reveal like Colt suit. So this sort of stuff wrapping around, it just makes it really interesting, rather than just having it kind of fading on. So just having something like that kind of just helps it feel like, wow, it's like there's something different to this whole effect, rather than it just being the standard stuff that you're used to expecting. So this is the big kind of money shot here, the reveal. So you can see it's kind of like as if like the blood in his veins or something, and then it kind of solidifies into the CG character like in its entirety. So really cool. See, it kind of rips out the knife and it melts it. So this is another thing, I love doing this stuff, like melting shit like that. So all you're doing, again, I talk about everything as particles, because particles are points. So however you want to treat points, same sort of thing, but you're just populating all this stuff, kind of like a level set, if you're familiar with that. You're populating it all with particles, and then you're essentially activating the stuff to erode. So what ends up happening is you have an area that the particles begin to delete. However you want to talk about, like perhaps instead of deleting, what you're doing is you're actually saying these are now taking this information over to now be a fluid sim. So now the stuff, it doesn't delete, it's just moving to another group that now this is fluid and it begins to fall down and drip. And then you're using that to then emit steam that's coming off of it. So that's generally how you can pull off a shot like that, and you get all the mist and everything else as it's all dripping down. So another example is the dripping here. It's the same sort of effect. It looks really cool though. I love doing that sort of like acid burn stuff. I had a free course I put out a while ago on how to do something very similar to that. So it's just having it all decay. And then you have a shot like this. The way that I would do this is I would just have Kano here have handcuffs, just not chained together. So he's just got to act like as if they are constrained together. And maybe you could have something light in there just to kind of represent some friction, but whole idea is that you do a CG chain here, just have it all kind of like burn and break apart. Pretty straightforward. I love that they introduced a flare here. It's really smart just because it gives you something to play off of. And again, you can see in a lot more detail how exactly like Cole's suit, this stuff is actually spreading out and solidifying over time. So So that's really cool, and it's just like an interesting way to go about doing something like this. So again, like as I was talking about Scorpion being in the same family, Reptile is in the same family to an extent with the reveal as Cole's suit is. And you can see here's the big reveal. And so this is all, the veins and everything is more about the area that's actually being affected, as if like the blood or something kind of becomes visible. And I'd say that they were very selective about the reveal. Like some of this stuff just fades on, but it probably needs to be. I'm sure that that was a creative process where they realized it was too distracting or something to just have it there. Who knows? But this looks really cool. I love it. I love the design. I like that they kind of went a different design of Reptile. Like I remember back in Mortal Kombat 1, to activate Reptile and fight him, you had to do a double flawless victory, and then I think no blocking. And then you have to punch the person off the pit level. If you do all those things, then you actually go down into the pit and fight Reptile. But I mean, Reptile is just a different colored version of Scorpion and Sub-Zero's moves altogether. I think it's Scorpion, if I recall. But with Sub-Zero's moves. So, yeah, I mean, the fact that they've evolved him to actually be something more than that now, where it's like you're actually taking on a Reptile character, is just more interesting than more of the same, right? Some of the lighting just really, like having that flare just makes the whole thing way more interesting. Because if you just have a CG creature, you know, we've seen that so much, but having the drool is really fun and easy to do. But it's I wouldn't say easy to do, I'm just saying it's fun. Like I love doing CG drool. The subtle things like the lens flare, but just having the interactive lighting of the flare itself just really makes these shots a lot more interesting, as well as having like a hair light on him that can just make it more visually interesting to look at. Doing the fatality is pretty straightforward, because again, it's just about keeping your arm relatively static, just like when you're stabbing I was talking about before with Walking Dead. The thing is that if you look at how he's doing it, he's kind of like cutting his way through his chest, so it isn't just like a clean snatch and grab. So I love that it is a bit more violent and gets all the way through, then he pulls it back over. I'd assume that this is a prop. I mean, like, why wouldn't you? You could totally do a CG, but like this sort of thing is something that you could just do as a beating heart prop that's spurting blood. You know, you don't need to do everything CG. Okay, the final one, I'm just going to plow through this really quickly. So, I actually was really impressed with this stuff. I hated the whole concept of like all these fighters. First of all, the magic tattoo stuff. I didn't like the concept of that. I didn't like the fact that they get these magic powers along the way. I've forgotten the terms for them, but I especially didn't like that Kano gets a mechanical laser eye as his magic power. And I didn't like that Jax has a magic power that gives him mechanical arms. Like, I hate that idea. It's such a silly idea, especially because he's ex-military. I don't know, you could easily work that in there, some experimental thing. I feel like timeline-wise, it's something that probably wouldn't make sense. Like, suddenly it's like, okay, let's go and, augment him with some new mechanical arms. But having them magically grow, because he's like, oh, I got my superpowers, no more chicken arms. I don't know, I just didn't like that. But from the visual effects side of things, I was really impressed with his stuff, because you got a shirtless guy, which has got to seamlessly blend the arms together. And that isn't impossible to do, but to track it on his chest, that's what I was really impressed with. Because every single time his chest muscles move or do anything, having it not slip, and I'm sure if I looked hard enough, you would see slippage, and I haven't really paid too much attention. I just pulled a few shots for this, but in general, I was really impressed. However, the more that I have looked at this just now, the more that I have a sneaking suspicion it's a little bit different to what I originally thought. And if so, it's really smart. So I'll talk about that in a second. Doing all this stuff, I mean, all you're doing is you're doing a match move. So the actor, the talent, is just doing his moves. You've then got to technically paint out the arms. And then you got to replace the chest for the areas that were painted out. So perhaps you do a 3D replacement on some of those areas. But then you have 3D arms that are just tracked in and they're all 3D. That's what you would typically do. The shaders, the metal, all this stuff looks really great. I thought they did a really awesome job on all of this. show he's so selfless that he's literally ripping his arms off that he just got, trying to save Sonya, and that's when all this stuff happens. So I've done plenty of this stuff, like mechanical kind of reveals. I'm actually doing Transformers as the next visual effects breakdown, so I'll definitely talk about all this stuff. These are one-offs again, and the secret to doing this sort of animation is that it's all cheats. It's nothing but cheats. And you'll literally just get areas that like use like a cutting like operator or something, and then have stuff just magically reveal on or scale out, animate visibility tracks. Like you're just doing whatever will just make something appear out of nowhere. I actually worked on Team Fortress 2, and one of the big challenges we had was the engineer, or whatever, I forget what they're called, engineer I think. And he had all these turrets, and it was tricky in the game where we'd have them upgrade from a machine gun turret to a rocket launcher turret in a video game and seamlessly do that. So there's a lot of things like that that even back in like 1997, when I first worked on the game, it was in a 10-year development cycle, because it was originally part of Half-Life. That's where trying to figure out a way to seamlessly do that was all cheating again. It's all cheats. So let's talk about these two shots, okay? Because I think that these are a perfect example of what to talk about here. So this is, like I said, what you would typically do is you would match move the character's performance. You might have a lot of makeup. So I think there's a shot here. So you'd have all the makeup, and these bits actually would work as tracking markers a lot of the time. So these would work really well. You would need more tracking markers because the tricky thing is that his muscles are going to be flexing a lot, and it means that they're going to be moving around. Then you go to shoulders. So you'd be littering tracking markers all over him, and even then it's going to be tricky. You could use AI, and that would give you a better result because it's going to notice and be able to do a lot more subtle stuff in here than usual. What you should be doing is having witness cams. Witness cams are going to be multiple cameras set up. We did this on Blade and a lot of other movies for the ashing. So you have this main camera, the hero camera, camera A, but then you'll have like your other cameras for filming, but then you have witness cams, which is pretty much just going to be a bunch of GoPros, and they're just going to be filming from different angles. The main thing is that way, when you're doing the performance, you're able to match it in the view, but then you're able to check from this camera and see, does it match up there? And the more angles you get, the more that you're able to say, okay, it's working in all these different angles, so it's more physically accurate then. That's what you would typically do. But having all the makeup here and these little kind of bolts and everything, that helps as well, because you'd definitely be able to pull tracks off of them. So that's what I initially thought, because that's what you would typically do. You would paint out the arms. Unfortunately, on certain shots like this, it's like, well, you're pretty much going to need to do like a 3D thing, because you can't just paint. You can paint background easy. You can't paint him very easily. I haven't spoken to. I'm assuming RSP probably pulled this stuff off. I'm not sure which studio did Jax, but this is an ambitious call to make that I usually wouldn't make the call on. I think his entire body is 3D, and it just makes the whole thing so much easier, because you got a muscly person, you're trying to track and keep all this stuff on. It's a freaking nightmare. Like, as soon as I saw the trailer for this movie, I'm just like, yeah, like they're using CG rather than props. You kind of need to, because they're just not going to like work very well, not going to feel right on the body. And so right away, as soon as I saw the trailer, I'm thinking like, that has to be a nightmare to track. But if you're tracking pretty much like his dog tags roughly, like, just pretty much just doing a head replacement, and whatever is here is just completely painted out and done 3D, everything just works, because you're now no longer needing to worry about tracking all this stuff, which is the nightmare, is all the slippage. It's just sitting on the mesh. So you just have his torso, his whole body, all the mechanical arms, all this stuff is just all 3D. Suddenly, it's not actually that tricky to do. You're just getting it to seamlessly attach the head. And that becomes such an easier thing to do. I won't say easy, but an easier thing to do. And the thing is, like, go back 5-10 years, like, you probably wouldn't make that call. But it's actually, I think Chris Godfrey's the VFX soup on this. He's ex-Animal Logic, one of the, I don't think he's a founder of it, but like he's been around for a long time, back in like the Crow's Nest days. I used to work next door to Animal. So like I think Chris Godfrey's gone client side for this, and so I don't know if it was his call or one of the studios that were tackling this that they decided to go that route, but it makes sense because then you're doing a head replacement. Everything else is 3D, or at least in terms of the torso. Although I can totally believe his legs are 3D, but who knows? But yeah, I would say like torso and arms being completely replaced, that's such an ambitious call, but it actually makes your life a heck of a lot easier. So kudos to them if that is the case. And I honestly think it is. Really awesome. I'm going to wrap things up there. Like I said, I've got the gardeners in the background and I've got cleaners in here as well. So I'm gonna get out of here really quick. But I'm going to be putting out 2 more this week. I'm going to be putting them out back to back, and then Transformers is going to be next week. Let me know if you're enjoying these. I'm going to keep saying that because I'm basically going to be doing a couple of these, and then I'm going to be sitting down and reevaluating whether this is something to keep doing every single week, or whether that little splinter of time that I have free, I can use it for something else. That being said, as we go into July, I've got a lot of training I'm going to be putting out. I'm actually putting out a free visual effects crash course on how to become a technical director. This is something that you guys have been asking me for. And so I'm going to put together a course that's going to get people really up to speed with how to be a technical director, learning to code and all that stuff. Meanwhile, just full disclosure, I'm actually putting together a big technical director mentorship right now, which I've been working on for a while, that, again, you guys have been asking about. So that's going to be a bigger course where I'm actually going to be working with you guys in learning how to do all this stuff, automate everything, do so much stuff. So it's going to be really cool, but I'm going to be putting out a lot of free training around that time. So like July, I'm going to be putting out a lot of stuff. So there's going to be tutorials, it's going to be a free course. It's all going to be leading up to a mentorship, which I'm going to be doing on becoming a certified technical director. And that's going to be really awesome as well. So there's lots of stuff in the works I'm excited about. And I'll leave it here for now, but definitely let me know in the comments if this is something that you like and you want me to keep doing. I did a poll recently. You guys seemed like, I think it was like 80% were like, yes, keep doing these. And then there was like 2%, which I think is like statistically 2 people were like, don't do these anymore. And then there's like 18% where like, just do it once in a while. Doing these every week is a lot of work, but if you guys are finding it valuable, then let me know, because this is the sort of stuff I do in my mentorship, my FXTD mentorship that I've been doing, because what I do is I'll actually critique everyone's work. We do live reviews, so I'll actually be doing this to everyone's work, giving feedback and saying improve on this, work on this, and each version that we do, each review, 1, 2, 3, it's getting better, and then it gets the final. And it's just amazing to see just the progression of people seeing their work with each revision, and me pointing out like, hey, if you just shift the weight here, if you blow that out here, do all these different things, suddenly the work is looking production quality. It's matching what you see in these movies. So I've always found that to be really great. And that's all based off of me doing dailies as a supervisor. I'll be sitting in dailies, critiquing people's work, saying, okay, this looks good, that looks, like it needs more work, I'd improve over here, fix the timing here. And the more you do that, each time it's getting better, and the artists are getting better, the more feedback they're getting on how to improve their work. So I've just found that to be a straight track record of like how to really drastically change and improve on yourself, opposed to just doing tutorials and being like, yeah, I kind of get what I'm doing. It's someone pushing you, saying, if you focus on this thing, or sometimes it is about just start from scratch, go back to the basics, get the timing right, get the momentum, get the weight, all these different key things. Once you get that right, all of this will work. And it's those valuable lessons that usually you don't learn until you get into production. So I'm going to leave it there. Thank you again for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you got a lot from it. And I'll be back tomorrow with another one. And hopefully the background noise wasn't too annoying. Okay. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll be back tomorrow with the next part in the series. Each week I plan to review a different film and share as many insights as I can with you. And if there's a particular movie that you want to see, leave a comment below and let me know. Or if there's any big questions not answered in this video that you would like to see covered, let me know as well. I'd love to hear from you. Creating these videos weekly is a lot of work, but I love sharing and I love helping creators like you. All I ask, if you want to support this channel as well as ensure I can create more of these videos, is if you could please subscribe to this channel, as well as feel free to spread the word to others about these videos. As I said, it mightn't mean much to you, but it'll mean the world to me. And you won't miss out on any of the upcoming videos that I'll be putting out daily. This has been an absolute pleasure. All the content I make for free, so that way we can all get a better understanding of the visual effects process and the filmmaking process as well. Finally, one last thing, I recently released a free course on how to raise your prices and land your dream clients as an artist. I've been in the industry for over 25 years, both as an artist as well as a manager, hiring artists and managing them, and of course paying them as well. So I'm very familiar with this topic. For me, it's a pet peeve that people say that there's no money in art, that art's not a career, or art doesn't pay. I want to eliminate the starving artist mindset for good. That's why I've created this 8-hour free course on everything I know about how to price yourself as an artist, and how to raise your prices and land your dream clients that are willing to pay you what you're worth. At least for now, this course is completely free to download, so get the entire 8-hour free course at pricingclass.com, or click the link in the description below to check it out there as well. And if you like this video, I put another video somewhere above me that I think you're going to like as well as a link to the playlist for all the visual effects breakdowns I've created, so that way you can absorb all of those too. I'm Allan McKay, thanks for watching.